He wasn't loud. He didn't cause a scene. He wasn't dressed in designer clothes, nor did he walk in with a fancy briefcase or an entourage. He was just a boy. A 13-year-old black boy named Jalen Brooks, standing quietly at the front desk of one of the most luxurious hotels in Savannah, Georgia. And yet, in the span of 5 minutes, he was judged, dismissed, and physically removed. Not because he broke a rule, not because he raised his voice, but simply because he didn't look like he belonged. The lobby was grand. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors that sparkled like glass, chandeliers imported from Italy. It was the kind of place where names whispered in the right circles opened doors without knocking. And Jalen? Well, he didn't have one of those names. At least not until his mother walked in. What happened next didn't require screaming. There was no fight, no shouting match, no viral meltdown. But 8 words, spoken calmly by a woman in heels and a soft gray power suit, brought that entire lobby to a halt. Even the bellhop stopped mid-step. Even the manager's hand, still hovering from where it had gripped Jalen's arm, dropped, slowly, like it had finally realized what it had done. "Take your hands off my son. Now." That was it. That's all it took. Because the woman standing in front of them wasn't just another guest. She was Elena Brooks, the founder and CEO of Brookstone Suites, the very company that owned the resort they were standing in. And in that moment, power shifted. Not with noise, but with truth. Undeniable, unstoppable truth. You see, what happened in that lobby wasn't just about a rude manager or a mistaken identity. It was about what happens when you let bias speak louder than facts. It was about what happens when you think someone's skin tone tells you their status. And it was about a child who chose silence, not because he was weak, but because he knew that sometimes quiet is the most powerful voice in the room. So today, we're telling you the full story. Not just the viral clip, not just the dramatic moment, but everything. The school, the history, the prejudice, the restraint, and the reckoning. Because Jalen's story isn't just one boy's moment of humiliation. It's a mirror, a reminder of what still happens in too many rooms, lobbies, classrooms, and board meetings, and a warning to those who still believe they can judge without consequence. So before we begin, ask yourself, what would you have done if you saw it? Laughed quietly, looked away, or spoken up? Because in the next 28 minutes, you're about to witness what happens when truth walks in wearing heels and a name that no one ever expected. Stay with us. This one's going to stay with you. Before the hotel, before the lobby full of stairs, before the humiliation that would echo across social media and corporate boardrooms, there was a classroom. And there was Jalen Brooks. Madison Hill Academy wasn't your typical private school. Perched on the edge of the historic district in Savannah, Georgia, the academy was old money with a fresh coat of diversity paint. Brick walls, ivy-covered pillars, glass trophy cases lined with awards from students whose parents sat on boards and golfed with senators. Jalen, meanwhile, didn't come from that world, but he belonged there, academically, intellectually, morally. At 13, he had the kind of quiet intelligence that made teachers smile and classmates roll their eyes. He was the type who always showed up early, turned in assignments with thoughtful annotations, and never interrupted. Not once. He was also one of only 3 black students in his grade. The only one who took advanced English with Mrs. Lancaster, a woman who wore pearls like armor and believed every student should read To Kill a Mockingbird twice before the age of 14. On a gray Wednesday morning, as a soft mist settled over the school grounds, Jalen sat front row, hands folded over his copy of the novel. Mrs. Lancaster asked, "What do you think Atticus meant when he said you never really understand a person until you climb inside of his skin and walk around in it?" The class went still. Then, Jalen raised his hand. His answer was thoughtful, precise. He meant that judgment is easy from the outside, but you can't know someone's truth until you carry their burden. Not just for a day, but as if it were your own. Mrs. Lancaster gave a small nod, a rare gesture of respect. But before the class could absorb the weight of Jalen's insight, a sharp voice pierced the moment. "Wow!" Chelsea Cooper, seated near the back, leaned sideways in her chair. "Didn't know we were letting the help audit class now." Laughter. Software ugly. A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others looked down, suddenly fascinated by their notebooks. Mrs. Lancaster didn't say a word. And Jalen? He didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't blink. He lowered his hand, quietly, deliberately, and opened his notebook to a blank page, letting the insult fall like dust that wouldn't stick. Chelsea smirked, turning to her friends with that knowing expression, like she'd just reminded everyone of the unspoken rule. Some people are just guests in spaces like this. They don't get to own the moment. They don't belong in the spotlight. They're tolerated, not welcomed. What Chelsea didn't know, what no one knew, was that Jalen's silence wasn't weakness. It was patience. And his mother had taught him well. You don't need to shout to be heard. Let the truth speak when the time is right. And when it does, make sure the whole room is listening. And that time was coming faster than anyone expected. Up next, Savannah Grand Resort, where the truth walks through the front doors, dressed in heels, and silence falls like thunder. It was Saturday morning, the kind of southern morning where sunlight slips through the Spanish moss like honey and everything moves just a little slower, except inside the Savannah Grand Resort, where wealth didn't walk, it glided. Guests in linen suits sipped espresso on sun-drenched balconies. Valets jogged between imported SUVs, and inside the lobby, a pianist played jazz so soft it felt like part of the wallpaper. At the front desk stood Jalen Brooks. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't lost. He stood just as his mother taught him, shoulders back, voice clear, manners precise. "Good morning. My name is Jalen Brooks. I believe my mother reserved the top-floor suite under Elena Brooks. She said I could check in early while she finishes a meeting downtown." The young receptionist, Maya, looked up, slightly surprised but not unkind. She nodded politely, began typing. And that's when it happened. From the far side of the lobby, a voice snapped like a whip. "Hey, step away from the desk." Jalen turned. Bradley Cooper, the resort manager, was marching toward him, expression hard, jaw tight. Middle-aged, well-groomed, with a badge that gleamed like it came with extra authority. But what shined brighter was his assumption. "This area is for guests only," he said, voice loud enough to draw glances. "You can't just walk in off the street and ask for rooms, son." Jalen blinked, calm. "Sir, I'm not—" "Don't talk back," Bradley cut in, already waving at a nearby bellhop. "Security will escort him out. This isn't a drop-in center." Maya hesitated. "Mr. Cooper, he said he's checking into the Brooks." I heard what he said, Bradley snapped, eyes still locked on Jalen. And I don't care what name he gave. We both know he doesn't belong here. Whispers spread. Two guests by the coffee cart looked over their shoulders. A couple paused at the elevators. Jalen's face didn't change. He simply looked at Maya. "Could you check the reservation, please?" She nodded quickly, fingers moving across the keyboard. But before she could speak, Bradley stepped in front of the screen, hands slamming onto the counter. "This is a 5-star property," he said, louder now. "Not a place for kids to sneak around pretending to be someone they're not." Then, without warning, he grabbed Jalen's arm. Not violently, but publicly, deliberately. The entire lobby seemed to inhale. Jalen didn't resist. He stood there, eyes steady, while Bradley began to guide him toward the exit. "Let's go. You can't just..." But then, the doors opened, and through the rotating glass stepped a woman, graceful, composed, wearing a soft gray pantsuit and carrying a leather briefcase that didn't scream money. It whispered it. Her heels clicked once, twice, 3 times on the polished marble floor, and when she saw her son being escorted like a trespasser, she stopped walking. Cold, silent. Elena Brooks didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. But the next words she said froze the room. "Take your hands off my son." And just like that, the story stopped being about a boy who didn't belong and became a story about a man who didn't deserve to be in charge. The room froze. Even the pianist stopped playing. Even the bellhop halfway across the lobby halted mid-step. Bradley Cooper turned his head, confusion folding into his face. His hand, still gripping Jalen's arm, hesitated, then dropped. "Ma'am, I think you're..." But Elena Brooks wasn't interested in his version of the story. She walked forward, heels ticking with judicial rhythm, each step louder than his excuses. She stopped 3 feet from him, calm, unshaken, but with eyes that could slice marble. "Did you ask his name? Did you check the reservation? Or did you just assume?" Bradley opened his mouth. I didn't realize who..." Elena didn't blink. Instead, she reached into her blazer and pulled out a small black card holder. One swift flick, a company badge embossed in silver, reflected the chandelier light. "Elena A. Brooks, founder and CEO, Brookstone Suites International." The logo behind the front desk? It was her logo. The resort they were standing in? Her property? The top-floor penthouse suite? Her personal space? The silence turned suffocating. Then her voice, still composed, still cold. "Mr. Cooper, you just put your hands on a registered guest. A minor. My son." Gasps echoed like ripples across a still pond. Guests exchanged looks. Maya at the desk went pale. "He gave you his name. He spoke clearly. He followed instructions. And still, you treated him like a trespasser. Not because of what he said, not because of how he behaved, but because of how he looked." Bradley stepped back, visibly sweating now. "Mrs. Brooks, I assure you I didn't mean..." "You meant exactly what you did," she cut in, sharper than a blade. "And worse, you did it in public, in front of your team and in front of guests. You taught them that appearance overrides policy, that assumption overrides process." Her voice rose, just enough. Measured, deadly. "You humiliated a child, my child, on property you don't even own." Then she turned slightly to Maya. "Please confirm the reservation details." Maya nodded rapidly, fingers trembling over the keyboard. "Yes, ma'am. The reservation for the presidential suite is confirmed, booked under Elena Brooks. Note on file authorizing early check-in for guest Jalen Brooks, with VIP concierge priority. Elena exhaled once, controlled cold fury behind her breath. Then, to Bradley, "You'll be relieved of your duties immediately. Hand over your badge. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. Your employment termination notice will be emailed before noon. And I expect a full incident report from every witness on this floor within the hour." Bradley stammered. You can't." "I just did," she snapped. "And let me be crystal clear, this isn't just about you. This is about every child who walks into a space like this and gets told by people like you that they don't belong." She turned to the staff. "Anyone here who believes behavior like this is acceptable, you can follow him out the door." No one moved. Jalen stood quietly, still steady, still silent. But in that moment, everyone saw him differently. Not because of who his mother was, but because they had finally opened their eyes to who he was all along. And that was just the beginning of the fallout. By the end of the day, the news had already reached corporate. Not through headlines, not through hashtags, but through a dozen witness reports, 2 security camera footages, and one name that no one dared ignore: Elena Brooks. Bradley Cooper didn't leave through the front entrance. He was escorted through the side loading dock, badge revoked, access cut, his name wiped from the resort's internal system by sunset. For years, there had been whispers, stories from staff about his tone, his selective enforcement of rules, his glances, his comments. But no one had spoken up. Because he was management, because silence felt safer, until now. This time, someone didn't just speak, she acted. And that action rippled far beyond the marble floors of the Savannah Grand. Within 72 hours, an internal memo was issued across all 140 Brookstone properties nationwide. Bias, implicit or explicit, will be treated as a breach of code of conduct. A mandatory training program titled "See the Person, Not the Profile" was launched, built directly under Elena's direction. Employees who had felt unseen, unheard, now found their inboxes filled with invitations to anonymous reporting channels and town halls with corporate leadership. And for the first time, housekeeping spoke in meetings. Bellhops asked questions, and managers listened. But not everyone walked away untouched. Chelsea Cooper, the girl from the classroom, the one who laughed when Jalen spoke, found herself on the other side of silence. When her father was fired, so was his corporate scholarship package that funded her tuition. Madison Hill Academy sent a short, polite letter. Effective immediately, Chelsea Cooper's enrollment will not be renewed for the upcoming term. No ceremony, no assembly, no farewell. By Friday afternoon, she was cleaning out her locker in silence. The same silence Jalen had known too well, the same silence she had helped create. And while Jalen never gloated, never mocked, never even acknowledged what had happened, others noticed. The glances in the hallway changed. The whispers faded. The quiet nods, respectful, regretful, began to replace the sneers. Because while Bradley lost a title and Chelsea lost a school, Jalen gained something far more lasting: recognition. Not just as that smart black kid in the front row, not just as the one whose mom owns hotels, but as someone who never needed to raise his voice because his presence spoke loud enough. But the biggest change of all? It wasn't about one boy or one manager or even one hotel. It was about a system learning, maybe for the first time, What happens when assumptions finally meet accountability? What began as one manager's downfall quietly grew into something far bigger. Because Elena Brooks wasn't finished. She didn't want revenge. She wanted reform. And reform, she knew, could not be driven by public shame alone. It needed policy, persistence, and purpose. 1 week later, Jalen Brooks received a letter, embossed in navy and silver, sealed with the emblem of the National Youth Leadership Forum. Inside, "Congratulations. You've been selected for our Young Voices in Leadership Mentorship track, representing students who've demonstrated exceptional grace under pressure." He didn't post it on social media, didn't tell the whole school. But when his teacher, Mrs. Lancaster, announced it in class, even the ones who used to roll their eyes applauded. Jalen simply nodded, as if to say, "I'm not surprised, just thankful." Elena took her next board meeting public, not with cameras, but by inviting employees from all levels of the company to sit in. For the first time in company history, a front desk agent presented a diversity proposal. A housekeeping supervisor shared a story about being ignored during training. A maintenance worker received a standing ovation for courageously recalling how often he'd been told to stay out of sight when VIPs arrive. And then, Elena introduced something unexpected. Every Brookstone suite moving forward will carry not just a luxury promise, but a dignity standard. This new policy would mandate bias response teams on site at every flagship property, guest dignity audits conducted quarterly, and a scholarship fund in Jalen's name awarded annually to youth who faced adversity with courage, not because they were victims, but because they were leaders in silence. Other chains took notice. First came the emails, then came the quiet changes in employee training manuals across competing brands. The word spread in hotel manager groups, human resource networks, even university-level hospitality curriculums. Be careful how you treat the next quiet kid at the front desk. You never know who's watching. Or worse, who his mother is. What started as a humiliation in a hotel lobby ended with a child stepping into leadership and an industry rethinking what it truly means to serve. Because luxury without respect isn't elegance. It's just arrogance with a better carpet. And Jalen, he kept showing up early, still quiet, still calm. But now, when he walked into any room, no one doubted he belonged there, not because of his last name, but because the silence around him had finally learned to listen. Not every story ends with fireworks. Some end in silence. But sometimes it's in that silence where justice finally speaks the loudest. Jalen Brooks didn't demand attention. He didn't film the incident. He didn't scream. He simply stood, firm, respectful, composed, while the world tried to shrink him into someone he wasn't. And that takes more strength than most people will ever understand. Because true strength isn't always loud. It doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it's the quiet refusal to break, even when everything around you tries to bend you. We live in a world that rushes to label, that assumes too quickly, that sees skin tone before it sees character, shoes before soul, accent before intent. But every once in a while, a moment like this cuts through all the noise. A boy, a mother, a name no one expected, and a truth that could no longer be ignored. Don't judge people by where they stand. Judge them by how they stand, even when the room is against them. So what do we take away from this? If you're a parent, raise your child to hold their head high, even in rooms not designed for them. Because when they know their worth, the room will eventually catch up. If you're a leader, power is not a license to dismiss. It's a responsibility to see, to listen, to correct. If you've ever felt invisible, let Jalen remind you, you are not the problem. The room that doesn't see you may simply not be ready for someone who refuses to shrink. And to everyone else, when you witness injustice, don't laugh, don't look away, don't wait. Because sometimes, the difference between humiliation and dignity is one person choosing to say, "He belongs here." Let this story remind you, power can be inherited, privilege can be bought, but respect is earned, and when given to the right person at the right moment, it changes everything. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think twice, like, share, and subscribe. We tell real stories that restore dignity, truth, and the power of quiet strength. Because in the end, it's not who shouts the loudest that wins, it's who walks away with their head held high and their story untouchable. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly just because of how they looked or where people assumed they came from? What would you have done if you were standing in that hotel lobby? Tell us your thoughts. Let's talk about dignity, silence, and when to finally speak up.